What happens when the very people sworn to protect you become the ones you fear the most? When a decorated internal affairs agent, who spent her career rooting out corruption, finds herself targeted by the same system she thought she could fix. Special Agent Kendra Mills never expected a routine lunch break to spiral into a dangerous game of intimidation, lies, and systemic betrayal. Pulled over without cause. Threatened at gunpoint by a patrol officer with something to hide, Kendra is about to uncover a network of corruption far deeper than she imagined. How far would you go to expose the truth, when the truth could cost you everything, including your life? Before we continue this story, let us know where you are watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Special Agent Kent. R.A. Mills gripped the steering wheel of her sleek black SUV, trying to enjoy the short lunch break she had granted herself. As the head of internal affairs in downtown Chicago, she rarely took time away from the office. Her schedule was usually packed with meetings, investigations, and endless paperwork. Yet today, she felt compelled to indulge in a rare moment of peace. She had decided to pick up food from her favorite diner, a small place known for its fried chicken and smooth jazz soundtrack. A stack of case files sat on the passenger seat, a stark reminder that her work was never truly done. While cruising through a quiet suburban stretch, Kendra noticed a patrol car idling by the curb. The officer inside watched her intently. Years of experience in law enforcement had sharpened her instincts. She knew exactly what that gaze usually meant: suspicion, or, more precisely, biased suspicion. Still, she didn't slow down. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her mind wandered back to the task force meeting earlier that morning, where she and her team discussed a growing number of complaints involving excessive force and racial profiling. It seemed that day's discussion might be more relevant than she realized. Moments later, the flashing lights appeared behind her. With a resigned sigh, Kendra pulled to the side of the road. Her heart pounded in annoyance rather than fear. This was the sort of behavior she was determined to root out. Face tight, with an expression bordering on anger, he tapped on the glass more forcefully than necessary, signaling her to lower it. Kendra complied. License and registration, he demanded. His nameplate read Richards. He was young, possibly in his early 30s, but the harsh lines of his face suggested someone used to intimidation. Kendra handed over her credentials without a word. She watched as he scanned them quickly, then frowned. "This doesn't add up," he muttered. "Excuse me?" Kendra asked, her voice calm but edged with irritation. Officer Richards shoved the documents back at her. "This car doesn't look like it belongs to you," he sneered, glancing around at the SUV's polished interior. "Got reason to suspect it might be stolen." Her jaw tightened. "You've run the plates, right?" she responded. "Because if you have, I'm certain my ownership should be quite clear." He ignored her question and ordered, "Step out of the car." Kendra's patience was wearing thin. Still, she kept her composure as she opened the door. She noticed his hand hover near his holstered weapon. She wasn't entirely surprised. She'd dealt with officers who jumped to extremes without reasonable cause. It happened more often than the department cared to admit. Once outside, she locked eyes with him. He towered over her by a good 6 inches, but Kendra remained unfazed. "Turn around and place your hands on the car," he barked. She didn't budge. Instead, she calmly reached into her blazer pocket, aware of how the movement might appear. Instantly, his hand clutched the gun. "Don't move," he shouted. Slowly, she held up her badge. "I'm Special Agent Kendra Mills," she said, keeping her voice firm. "Head of Internal Affairs. I suggest you rethink your tone and your next moves very carefully, Officer Richards." Richards hesitated. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by a flash of panic. "You, Internal Affairs?" he stammered, stepping back slightly. His gun hand fell away from the weapon. Clearly, he had not expected this. Kendra folded her arms. "Did you just racially profile me, Officer Richards? Because that's exactly how this appears. I strongly advise you start talking." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, but she refused to let any fear show. She was angry, not just for herself, but for every civilian who had been subjected to this sort of harassment. Before Richards could respond, another squad car pulled up behind him. A stern-looking man in uniform stepped out. Kendra instantly recognized him from files she had reviewed in the past. Sergeant Harris. He walked over, his expression twisting between displeasure and concern. "What's going on here?" Harris demanded, looking between Richards and Kendra. His gaze landed on Kendra's badge, and his expression shifted. "Agent Mills." Kendra didn't flinch. "Unless Officer Richards has a legitimate explanation for this stop, I'm considering this a clear case of harassment." Richards opened his mouth, but only incoherent words spilled out. Finally, he mumbled something about standard procedure and suspicious vehicle, though even he seemed unconvinced. Kendra glanced at Harris, waiting for a response or an acknowledgement of the impropriety. Harris narrowed his eyes at Richards. "Officer Richards, my office." "Now," Harris said through gritted teeth, each word dripping with the promise of repercussions. For a split second, Richards looked like he might argue, but he swallowed whatever he had been about to say, lowered his gaze, and walked back to his squad car. Kendra watched as Harris motioned for her to wait. Richards drove off, lights still flashing, disappearing around the corner. Sergeant Harris turned toward her, offering a quick apology. "I'm sorry for this, Agent Mills. I'll handle it personally." Yet there was a flicker in his expression, some mixture of caution and resentment. Kendra felt the electric pulse of anger still surging through her veins. "I've heard that line before, Sergeant. If this is the caliber of officer you have under your command, we're going to have bigger problems." Harris gave a curt nod. "Understood. We'll be reviewing this immediately." Without another word, Kendra got back in her SUV and shut the door firmly. She had no intention of letting the matter drop. Not this time. Her mind already started formulating a plan. She would look into Officer Richards and, by extension, his entire precinct. If there was a pattern, she intended to expose it. Though her heart still pounded from the confrontation, she drove away with steely determination, ready to initiate a deeper investigation into what she suspected was a systemic problem, one that she would unravel, no matter how far it reached. Early the next morning, Kendra sat in the Internal Affairs conference room, recounting the previous day's incident to her team. Detective Sean Davis, her colleague and closest confidant in the department, leaned forward in his chair, absorbing every detail. At the far end of the table, Lisa, a diligent researcher who never missed a clue, typed away on her laptop, pulling up any record she could find on Officer Richards. "It's not the first complaint," Lisa announced, scanning through a list on the screen. "Richards has a history of aggressive stops and racially charged incidents. Most complaints never advanced beyond preliminary review, all closed under questionable circumstances." Kendra's lips pressed into a firm line. "And who's his superior?" she asked, though she suspected the answer already. Lisa tapped the screen. "Sergeant Harris." Sean exchanged a glance with Kendra. "That name's come up in a few older cases," he said, voice low. "Nothing ever stuck, but there were rumors he buried complaints to protect certain officers, always lacking evidence to move forward." Kendra inhaled, recalling how Harris had reacted at the scene. He'd seemed more angry that she was there than concerned about Richards' behavior. It had the faint smell of a cover-up in the making. They spent the next few hours gathering every relevant file, complaint or internal memo about Richards, Harris, and that precinct. As they sifted through stacks of paperwork, it became apparent there was a larger pattern. Incidents of excessive force, intimidation tactics, and suspicious traffic stops peppered the precinct's record, disproportionately affecting minority neighborhoods. Kendra felt her blood simmer. This was more than one rogue cop. This was a potential nest of corruption. By midday, Kendra decided she needed a breather. She grabbed a sandwich from the break room and returned to her office, flipping through the newest additions to her reading pile. The more she learned, the more the tension in her chest grew. If these patterns were accurate, there was a wide-reaching problem that might extend beyond Richards and Harris, yet proving it would require careful, methodical steps, and it might make her a target. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. "This is Mills," she answered. The voice on the other end was calm, but held a hint of urgency. Kendra, it's Sean. Just got wind that Richards is out on patrol this afternoon. There's a rumor he's already made another stop that seems off. You want to check it out? Send me the location. She replied without hesitation. Within minutes, she was back behind the wheel, heading toward a suburban park. The tip said Richards was harassing a group of teenagers. Anger flared again. Did he learn nothing from yesterday's incident? Pulling up to the park, she parked discreetly and got out, scanning the scene. A small cluster of teens, mostly black and Hispanic, stood near a basketball court. Richards loomed over them, arms crossed, voice raised. With him was another officer she didn't recognize. The kids looked intimidated, but one tall teen in a red hoodie stood his ground, arms folded defiantly. Kendra approached, showing her badge immediately. "Everything okay here?" she asked in a measured tone. Richards spun around, recognition darkening his expression. "This doesn't concern you, Agent Mills," he snapped. "We got a noise complaint." The teen in the red hoodie, whom Kendra would later learn was named Marcus, shot back. "We weren't doing nothing. He rolled up on us, accusing us of blasting music too loud. We didn't even have speakers with us." Kendra surveyed the scene. No sign of music equipment, no sign of any real disturbance, just a few rattled youths. She turned to Richards. "Where's the complainant?" Richards fumbled. "They left, but I got enough reason to suspect these kids were loitering." "Loitering in a public park?" Kendra asked, arching a brow. "That's hardly a crime during daylight hours. And they look to be simply talking, not causing trouble." The second officer shifted uncomfortably. "We're just following up," he muttered, not meeting Kendra's gaze. Kendra gently gestured for Marcus and his friends to step aside. "Are you all okay?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded, though tension still clung to his face. "We're fine," but he was about to start threatening us again. "It's not the first time he's come around here acting like we're criminals." Turning back to Richards, Kendra's voice sharpened. "Officer, stand down. Unless you have documented evidence of wrongdoing, you're done here." She'd rarely pulled rank so overtly, but Richards's behavior warranted it. Richards glared, his frustration barely contained. "You have no right to countermand my authority in the field," he snapped. She lifted her badge higher. "Actually, as head of internal affairs, I do. And if you decide to keep pushing, you're only digging yourself a deeper hole." For a moment, it seemed like Richards might escalate, but the second officer whispered something to him. Richards' face flushed, growled under his breath, and backed off. The tension didn't dissipate entirely, but it was enough to allow the teens to disperse. Kendra watched him climb back into his squad car, slamming the door so heart-rattled. He shot her a final, hostile look before driving off. The second officer followed suit, though he avoided eye contact entirely. As the patrol cars left, Marcus and his friends turned to Kendra in relief and gratitude. She gave them a reassuring nod, advising them to report any future harassment. Inside, though, she felt a growing sense of dread. Richards had crossed a line twice in 2 days, and it was becoming clear that he felt emboldened, protected, even. If an officer was this brazen in front of an internal affairs agent, what else might be festering in that precinct? With renewed resolve, she headed back to the office. It was time to dig deeper into Richards's record and to see just how far Sergeant Harris's influence spread. Something told her she was only scratching the surface of a much larger problem, one that threatened to expose an entire web of corruption within law enforcement circles she thought she knew well. Kendra spent the next several days sifting through a mountain of documentation. She and her team pored over spreadsheets of complaint records, body cam logs, and disciplinary hearings, searching for any thread that connected Officer Richards, Sergeant Harris, and possibly higher-ups. The patterns were unsettlingly clear. Minority communities were targeted more often, complaints were routinely dismissed, and certain names kept appearing in the chain of command. One afternoon, Lisa burst into Kendra's office, eyes alight with discovery. "Got something," she announced. "Looks like Richards has been written up multiple times for rough conduct, but each time, the charges disappeared at the desk of Sergeant Harris." And guess who signed off on at least 2 of those dismissals? Kendra's stomach nodded. Harris. Lisa nodded. Exactly. There's more. I found email exchanges where Harris is chatting with a real estate developer named Raymond Ellis. The messages are vague, but they mention cleaning up neighborhoods and facilitating relocations. Could be code for driving people out. Leaning back in her chair, Kendra exhaled. This suggests a scheme bigger than just a racist officer. Maybe they're weaponizing the police force to harass residents, so they'll leave, and then the developer buys properties at rock-bottom prices. Lisa grimaced. That's what I'm suspecting. It's systematic and profitable. Before Kendra could respond, her cell phone buzzed. She recognized the number as Sean's. Kendra, I have a source in that precinct, he said urgently. They claim Harris and Richards are part of a ring that's been burying complaints for years. But it goes beyond them. Some high-ranking officers might be involved. Kendra felt a chill. We need evidence, she said. I don't want to accuse half the precinct without proof, or else they'll bury it again. We'll find proof, Sean assured. But watch your back. My source also mentioned they're not happy you're looking into them. That evening, Kendra stayed late at the office, combing through digital logs that Lisa had compiled. With each email snippet and body cam snippet she analyzed, the bigger picture grew into something undeniably sinister. People were being intimidated into leaving their homes, often on false charges. Complaints evaporated. Officers known to use aggression remained on the streets. And somewhere in the background, the name Raymond Ellis kept popping up, connected to real estate acquisitions. Night fell, and the building's cleaning staff arrived, politely ignoring Kendra's presence as she worked. Close to midnight, she decided to step out for coffee. The moment she exited the office doors onto the deserted street, a prickling sensation shot up her spine. A black sedan was parked across the way, engine idling. She tried to act casual as she walked toward a cafe, still open late, but her heart pounded. The sedan's headlights flicked on, momentarily blinding her. Was she being watched? When she glanced back over her shoulder, the sedan pulled away slowly, disappearing around the corner. Shaking off her unease, Kendra ducked into the cafe, ordered coffee, and found a seat near the window. She pretended to check messages on her phone, but stayed alert. No sign of the sedan. Maybe it was nothing. Yet her instincts told her otherwise. The next day, her concerns solidified. Just as she resumed digging into records, an anonymous text flashed on her phone screen. Stop digging, Mills. You don't know who you're messing with. She stared at the message, blood running cold. After years in law enforcement, she was no stranger to threats. But this one felt different, personal. She forwarded the message to Sean, then locked her office door. Her mind raced. The typical approach would be to inform her superiors, but she suspected some within the upper ranks might be compromised. She couldn't trust everyone. She called Sean on his private line. I got a warning message, she said. They want me off the case. Any idea who it's from? He asked. Could be Richards, Harris, or one of their associates. She replied. Or maybe someone even higher up. Either way, it means we're on to something. Sean offered to come by. We need a solid plan, or they'll outmaneuver us. People like this have resources and connections. Kendra agreed. Meet me tonight. We'll go over everything. That evening, Sean arrived at her office, carrying a box of old files. He explained that an informant had slipped him documents indicating not just harassment cases, but financial kickbacks. We've got money transfers from Ellis's development firm to shell accounts possibly linked to Harris, and maybe others, Sean said. Kendra's jaw tightened. They're basically using uniformed officers to pressure communities, then flipping the properties for a profit. She paused, thinking of the families she'd grown up around, people who worked hard, only to be pushed aside by greed and corruption. We have enough to raise hell, but not enough to guarantee convictions. We need more. Sean nodded. My informant says Sergeant Harris might be meeting with Ellis tomorrow at a secluded diner on the outskirts of town. Could be our chance to catch them red-handed, or at least gather more evidence. Kendra felt her pulse pick up. Then we set up surveillance. But we have to be careful. If they catch on, we lose everything, and they'll come after us harder. As the hours passed, they strategized, sorting which angles to pursue first. They'd begin by quietly getting a warrant for phone records and possibly stake out the diner for direct observation. Kendra's mind churned with the risks. Crooked cops, a powerful developer, and the threat of exposure. If she failed, the entire investigation could be buried. But if she succeeded, she'd tear down an entire network of corruption that had flourished behind the badge. Before heading home, Kendra glanced out the window again, half expecting that ominous sedan to reappear. Nothing. Yet the invisible pressure weighed heavily. She knew the next few days would be pivotal. Either she'd break this case wide open, or she'd become the next victim of a system that had protected men like Richards and Harris for far too long. Dark clouds hovered overhead as Kendra parked her SUV behind an abandoned gas station, a short distance from the diner where Sergeant Harris was rumored to meet Raymond Ellis. Sean arrived moments later in an unmarked vehicle, and Lisa, who had volunteered for surveillance duty, tucked her sedan out of sight on the opposite side of the street. They communicated via discreet earpieces, determined to document any conversation or handoff that might occur. Kendra's pulse hummed with nervous energy. If they caught Harris and Ellis exchanging incriminating information, they could blow the investigation wide open. If they were spotted, however, they risked spooking the suspects, ruining months of work, and possibly putting themselves in danger. Minutes ticked by, and the diner's parking lot remained mostly empty. Neon lights flickered above its shabby sign. Finally, a sleek black luxury car rolled in. Out stepped a man in an expensive suit, tall and confident. He had to be Ellis. He glanced around briefly, then strode inside. 10 minutes later, a battered police cruiser pulled up. Harris got out, scanning the area warily. The tension in the air felt suffocating as Kendra adjusted her phone, which was rigged to record video. Through the diner's large window, they spotted Ellis and Harris sit across from each other at a corner booth, their heads bowed close in serious conversation. Kendra couldn't capture audio from this distance, but her phone's camera zoomed in on Harris, sliding an envelope across the table. In return, Ellis produced a stack of papers. Kendra's heart quickened. Even from afar, it looked significant, contracts perhaps, or something more damning. After a short exchange, Ellis rose, leaving the envelope with Harris. He stepped out first, returning to his car with a practiced indifference. Moments later, Harris emerged, glancing nervously in all directions. He clutched the envelope under his jacket. Kendra ducked behind her dashboard, breath catching. Thankfully, he didn't seem to notice her vehicle. He slipped into his cruiser and drove off. Kendra exhaled. "Did we get enough?" she asked into her earpiece. Lisa's voice crackled back. "We have footage of the envelope exchange, but not the contents or conversation. Still, it's solid circumstantial evidence." Sean chimed in. "We need more direct proof of wrongdoing, like what's actually in that envelope. But at least we know there's a paper trail." Quietly, they followed Harris's cruiser, keeping a safe distance so as not to raise suspicion. He drove out of the city's commercial district and into a rundown neighborhood. Pulling up to a small, windowless office building, he parked behind it. Kendra and Sean watched from afar as Harris went inside, the envelope tucked under his arm. "Let's see if we can get closer," Kendra said, carefully stepping out of her SUV. Sean followed, both moving silently through shadows. Rain began to fall, masking the sound of their footsteps on the wet pavement. They peered through a side window where the blinds were partially drawn. Harris stood at a desk, flipping through documents from the envelope. Kendra lifted her phone, snapping photos of each visible page. She saw references to property addresses, suspicious payment schedules, and what looked like official police forms. This was bigger than she had even suspected, evidence that ties the real estate deals directly to specific police actions. Just then, Harris seemed to sense something. He looked toward the window, a frown creasing his brow. Kendra and Sean dropped down, hearts pounding. After a few tense moments, Harris resumed whatever he was doing. Taking the opportunity, Kendra whispered, "We have to be sure he doesn't move these files. We need them." Sean nodded. "Let's call for backup." We can get a warrant to raid this place. A buzzing vibration interrupted them. Kendra's phone lit up with a new text from an unknown number. You're out of your league, Mills. Walk away. She clenched her jaw. The intimidation had escalated. They scurried back to their vehicles to regroup. Lisa drove up, rolling her window down. If Harris leaves with those documents, he could destroy everything before we get a warrant, she warned. Kendra considered her options. Entering the building without authorization was risky and illegal. Yet if they let Harris slip away with that envelope, the evidence might vanish. We need to make a choice, Kendra said, raindrops sliding down her face. Sean began. We should. Suddenly, the office door opened. Harris strode out, carrying a sealed folder. He tossed it into his cruiser and fired up the engine. They scrambled to follow him in a small convoy, cautious not to alert him. The chase led them down side streets, past warehouses and dilapidated lots, until Harris finally pulled into another parking lot. It was adjacent to a dingy, one-story building with minimal signage. He hurried inside, folder in hand. Kendra parked 2 blocks away. She was about to step out when a knock on her window startled her. Her heart lurched, expecting an attacker. Instead, it was Officer Richards, face twisted in a triumphant sneer. How had he appeared out of nowhere? Agent Mills, he said through the glass. She cracked the window. The icy drizzle slicked his uniform. Looking for trouble. Are we? Her stomach dropped, but she kept her tone steely. You're off duty, Richards. Unless you plan to arrest me, get out of my way. He glanced over his shoulder at Sean and Lisa, who were stepping out of their cars. How cute. The whole team is here, Richards mocked. His hand hovered near his own weapon. Seems you're doing a lot of snooping. Might not be healthy. Kendra's anger flared. Last time I checked, investigating police corruption is my job. Richards leaned closer, eyes gleaming with hostility. You think you're a hero, Mills? You have no idea how deep this goes. If you had any sense, you back off. Before she could retort, the door to the building slammed open, drawing everyone's gaze. Harris stood there, phone in hand, possibly having spotted them. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face at the sight of Richards confronting Kendra. Then he barked something, motioning urgently at Richards to leave. Richards lowered his voice. You heard the Sarge. You want to keep it this, fine? Don't say I didn't warn you. He stepped away, and Kendra could practically feel the violence simmering under his composure. As Richards hurried to join Harris, Kendra gestured for Sean and Lisa to stand by. She could sense the entire operation teetering on the edge. They now had partial evidence of property deals, suspicious documents, and potential bribery. But corners of the department were obviously working against them. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from that unknown number. This is your last warning. Kendra took a slow, steadying breath. She was not about to stop. The men in that building could be planning their next move, possibly destroying evidence or plotting a cover-up. She and her team had to figure out a strategy, quickly. Let's fall back and regroup, Sean suggested, noticing the tension. We need a full, legal approach or they'll nail us on technicalities. Kendra nodded reluctantly, adrenaline coursing through her. As they drove off, she vowed that the next time they confronted Harris and Richards, they'd have airtight evidence and official backing. She refused to let the intimidation or the threat of danger derail her pursuit of justice. The following morning, Kendra marched into the chief of police's office, a thick folder tucked under her arm. The chief, a man in his late 50s with steely gray hair, looked up from his desk and gestured for her to close the door. She'd requested an urgent meeting, specifying that it concerned a corruption case implicating multiple officers. The chief's expression was grim, as though he sensed the gravity of her complaint. Kendra wasted no time, laying out photographs, emails, and typed transcripts. She described the diner meeting, the shadowy office encounter, and the real estate developer, Raymond Ellis, who appeared to be funneling money into the precinct under the guise of revitalization. When she finished, the chief steepled his fingers, silent for a long moment. This is a serious allegation, he finally said, voice heavy. You're claiming Sergeant Harris Officer Richards, and potentially others have formed a ring to harass civilians and push them out of key neighborhoods for profit? That's correct, Kendra replied. We have partial but compelling evidence, enough to justify warrants and deeper investigation. But I can't do it alone. Some within the department might be compromised. The chief's eyes flickered with concern. And you're sure? Kendra nodded. 100%. I've also been receiving anonymous threats. They want me to stop digging. He exhaled slowly. All right, Agent Mills. You'll have our official support. But proceed carefully. We'll bring in an external task force for neutrality. In the meantime, gather everything you can. I'll see to it that no one buries your requests for warrants. Relief flooded Kendra. This was the break she needed. After leaving the chief's office, she convened with Sean and Lisa. We're greenlit, she announced. The chief's on board. A few hours later, Kendra and Sean led a team of internal affairs officers, accompanied by trusted precinct members, to serve warrants on Harris's office and home. Another coordinated strike targeted Ellis's business headquarters downtown. Lisa managed the flow of real-time intel, ensuring the operations happened simultaneously so no one had a chance to destroy evidence. At Harris's office, Kendra found locked cabinets and a safe. One of the tech specialists cracked them open, revealing stacks of documents, electronic storage devices, and a ledger that made Kendra's stomach churn. Property addresses were listed alongside dates, suspected intimidation tactics, and amounts of money. Some pages specifically mentioned Officer Richards handling enforcement. It was all there, black and white proof of systematic corruption. While bagging and tagging the evidence, Kendra got word that Ellis's downtown office yielded even more incriminating material. Emails explicitly tying Ellis to Harris and naming other officers who cooperated for financial gain. One email read, "Ensure Richards applies pressure. We need the Jenkins family out by next month." Another referenced payout schedules, with sums well above any legitimate consulting fee. In the midst of the operation, Kendra received a frantic call from Lisa. "Kendra, there's been an arrest. Officer Richards just detained a city councilman's daughter on suspicious grounds. The press is all over it. Councilman Rivera is furious." Kendra closed her eyes briefly, fury rising. "Richards is still on the street? I thought he'd be suspended pending investigation." Lisa's voice shook. "He was, but apparently Harris covered for him before a warrant was served. Now he's gone rogue. The councilman is heading to the station, demanding accountability." Kendra hurried to the station, adrenaline spiking. By the time she arrived, Sergeant Harris was there in handcuffs, guarded by a pair of internal affairs agents. He looked disheveled, anger and fear flickering behind his eyes. As Kendra approached, Harris spat. "This is a witch hunt. You won't stop it at me. Plenty of big names will go down if you keep pushing." She stared him down, refusing to be intimidated. "We plan to investigate everyone involved, top to bottom." Nearby, Councilman Rivera, a tall man with a commanding presence, demanded, "Where's Richards? I want him off the force immediately." The chief stepped forward, announcing Richards had fled when he realized the net was closing. An APB was out on him. "We'll find him," the chief promised, then turned to Kendra. "Thank you, Agent Mills. We wouldn't have gotten this far without your persistence." Outside, sirens blared as officers scrambled to locate Richards. News cameras rolled, capturing the chaos and the unfolding scandal. The public reaction was immediate and vocal. Protesters gathered, signs held high, demanding systemic change. Kendra felt a wave of validation. These revelations proved that her investigation was not only justified but necessary. Later that day, Sean called from a stakeout. They spotted Richards near the edge of town, driving an unmarked vehicle. "He's armed and considered dangerous." "I'm on my way," Kendra responded, driving out to meet Sean. The location was a deserted parking lot behind a row of closed factories. When she arrived, half a dozen squad cars formed a perimeter. She joined Sean at the command post. "Any movement?" Sean shook his head. "He's holed up inside that old warehouse. We've got him cornered." Negotiations began, led by a crisis response unit. Kendra stood by. hearing every tense word crackle through radio static. Richards raged about betrayal, accusing the department of letting him take the fall. "I did what I was told," he shouted. "They told me to keep those neighborhoods under control, and now I'm the bad guy." Kendra felt a pang of pity, overshadowed by the knowledge of the harm he had done. After hours of back and forth, Richards finally emerged, weapon dangling in his hand. A negotiator coaxed him into dropping it. Officers swarmed in, cuffing him as he collapsed to his knees. The weight of his choices seemed to crush him. Sean exhaled, eyes meeting Kendra's. "It's over." She nodded, heart pounding. "Now we have the chance to fix what's broken." In the following weeks, as Harris, Richards, and Ellis faced charges ranging from racketeering to civil rights violations, Kendra worked tirelessly on the aftermath. Victims needed restitution. Precinct policies needed an overhaul, and the city braced for the storm of public outrage. But for Kendra, the real triumph was seeing a community freed from intimidation, families able to return home without fear, and a department forced to confront its own corruption. As she filed the final report late one night, she received a text from Councilman Rivera. "My daughter is safe. Thank you. The city owes you." Kendra smiled faintly, shutting off her phone. She stared at the growing stack of case files on her desk. This was only one battle in a much larger war for accountability. Yet for the first time in months, she felt real hope that change was possible, even if it came at great personal cost. In the wake of the scandal, Special Agent Kendra Mills became both a symbol of relentless investigation and a lightning rod for criticism. Citizens who had been silenced now felt empowered to speak out, filing formal complaints with renewed confidence. The investigation prompted a full-scale audit of policing practices in multiple precincts, uncovering related misconduct that might have remained hidden for years. Within the department, reforms finally gained momentum. New policies mandated independent reviews of all use of force complaints, stricter penalties for racially biased policing, and increased transparency around disciplinary actions. Officers who once felt pressure to remain silent found their voices, realizing that honesty was not only safer but valued. Real estate speculators who had exploited vulnerable communities were investigated, their illicit deals scrutinized and shut down. Councilman Rivera championed legislation aimed at preventing the kind of corruption that had thrived under Sergeant Harris and Officer Richards. The media spotlight, once focused on a single traffic stop, broadened to examine every corner of systemic injustice that fueled such abuses. And as the city's trust in law enforcement began its slow rebuild, many gave credit to Kendra's determination to expose a truth that others tried to bury. For Kendra, the final arrest marked the beginning of true accountability. The individuals responsible for terrorizing neighborhoods faced criminal charges. Families displaced by underhanded tactics received financial restitution and, more importantly, justice. Though the fight to maintain ethical policing would never truly end, Kendra knew that shining a light on corruption was the first critical step in driving it away. With Richards, Harris, and Ellis held to account, she could finally look forward. Because for her, and for the people she served, justice was not just a lofty ideal. It was a promise she intended to keep every single day.